Hey guys, tonight we walk into a world where the alarm clock is prophecy and the day ahead is already ruined by destiny. You are standing in the thin gray light before dawn, somewhere between sleep and myth, where Greek heroes wake up knowing exactly how their stories end, and still have to get dressed. The air smells like olive oil, old bronze, and inevitability. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crows like it's announcing doom instead of breakfast. You stretch, already tired, because everyone here is tired. You probably won't survive this, not because of monsters or wars, but because carrying certainty about your own tragic ending is exhausting in a way no battlefield ever could be. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. As you settle in, you're invited, quietly, politely, to post your location and local time in the comments, because fate may be universal, but insomnia is deeply personal. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move forward without any dramatic fanfare because dramatic fanfare is for people who don't already know the ending. The heroes around you do. They wake with that knowledge pressing down on their chests like a heavy blanket they can't kick off. Achilles knows his name will echo forever, but his life will not. Odysseus knows he will get home eventually, but only after years of humiliation, loss, and maritime customer service complaints. Even the lesser heroes, the ones history barely remembers, sense it too, the quiet certainty that their choices matter, but not in the way they wish. You walk past a low stone wall, where a young warrior sharpens his spear with the enthusiasm of someone brushing their teeth before an execution. This is not metaphorical. In ancient Greek thought, fate, Moira, is not optional, not negotiable, and not particularly interested in your feelings. One mainstream historical fact you absorb almost casually is that the Greeks believed fate predated the gods themselves. Even Zeus, king of Olympus, could delay destiny but not cancel it. This is comforting in a cosmic way and deeply annoying in a practical one. You sit beside the warrior. He does not look up. He already knows you're there, because oracles said you would be, probably in an annoyingly vague way. The Greeks loved their oracles imprecise. "You will meet a great stranger today" was basically ancient spam mail. A quirky fringe tidbit slips into your mind. Some ancient Greeks believed dreams were not symbolic at all, but literal sneak previews of unavoidable events. Imagine waking up every morning having already watched spoilers for your own life. No wonder everyone looks tired. As the sun creeps higher, you realize something unsettling. These heroes are not brave in the way modern movies sell bravery. They are not fearless. They are deeply, bone-achingly aware. Courage here is not charging forward without knowledge. It is continuing despite knowledge. Historians still argue whether Greek heroism was meant to glorify suffering or to warn against excessive pride. But standing here, watching a man lace up sandals he knows will walk him toward death, the distinction feels academic. You follow the daily rhythm of the camp, if it can be called that. Breakfast is bread, figs, and resignation. Someone jokes that at least fate didn't predict bad digestion. And this counts as one of the 3 jokes for tonight, so treasure it. Laughter here is not joy. It's pressure release. The heroes joke the way people do in hospital waiting rooms, quietly, awkwardly, and with a shared understanding that the universe is not listening. Or worse, it is. As you move among them, you sense how prophecy shapes posture. Shoulders slump not from armor, but from anticipation. Hands hesitate before action, not out of fear, but out of futility. You realize that knowing the end drains the present of its illusion. Free will still exists. Heroes make choices constantly, but those choices feel like decorative variations on a pre-written theme. Choose courage or cowardice. kindness or cruelty, the destination remains unchanged. This is where the fatigue truly sets in. It's not physical tiredness, though there is plenty of that. It's existential jet lag. Living out a story whose final chapter you already read messes with your sense of time. Every victory feels provisional. Every joy comes with an expiration date printed clearly on the label. Even love, which flickers around the edges of campfires and stolen glances, carries the weight of countdown clocks. You don't fall in love here thinking forever. You fall in love thinking until. Another historical reality settles in. Many Greek heroes were not kings or demigods at first. They were local champions, aristocratic warriors, men bound by family expectations and civic duty. The myths later elevated them, but in their own imagined reality, they were painfully human. The fringe tradition that sneaks in here suggests that some cults believed heroes were exhausted spirits even after death, still reliving their fated paths in ritual reenactments. Eternal fame apparently comes with mandatory overtime. You notice Achilles sitting apart, staring at his hands like they've personally betrayed him. He is young, devastatingly competent, and already done with existence. His choice, short life with glory or long life in obscurity, is often framed as heroic, but you can see the trick in it now. Either way, something is taken from him, either life or meaning. The gods call this balance. Humans call it unfair. Achilles calls it Tuesday. You walk closer, and though he doesn't speak, you feel the weight of his awareness. He knows his heel will fail him. He doesn't know when, and that uncertainty is the cruelest part. Knowing the ending does not include knowing the timing, which means every step is both ordinary and potentially final. This is the second joke, very gently delivered by the universe. Fate gives you certainty but withholds scheduling details, like a doctor who refuses to tell you the appointment time. Around you, the camp stirs fully awake. Armor clinks. Someone complains about sand in their sandals. Yes, even destined heroes hate sand. You realize how mundane this all is. Fate does not arrive with thunder. It arrives with routine. The extraordinary is buried beneath daily repetition, and that repetition is what wears everyone down. You begin to understand the emotional core of Greek tragedy. Not sudden disaster, but prolonged anticipation. The audience knows the ending. The characters know it too. The drama lives in watching everyone move toward it anyway, trying to extract meaning from the slow walk forward. Historians still argue whether these stories were cathartic or instructional, but standing here, you suspect they were therapeutic in a grim, communal way. If heroes suffer under fate, ordinary people can survive their own smaller certainties. As the sun climbs higher, you feel your own eyelids grow heavy, not from boredom, but from absorption into this weary rhythm. This is not a story about triumph. It's about endurance, about waking up every day, knowing how it ends, and still tying your sandals. And as you continue walking forward with them, you realize this exhaustion is the point. The heroes are not here to inspire you with victory. They are here to sit beside you in the quiet hours of the night and say, without words, "Yes, I know, me too." Quote, "You don't get the luxury of sleeping in. Fate does not allow snooze buttons." As the morning stretches on, you notice how destiny settles into the heroes, lives the way dust settles on unused furniture, slowly, constantly, and without asking permission. This is not the dramatic moment where prophecy strikes like lightning. This is the part where fate becomes routine. The part where knowing the future feels less like revelation and more like unpaid labor. You walk through the camp again, now fully awake, and realize something quietly unsettling. Everyone has plans today, even though the ending is fixed. Achilles plans to train. Odysseus plans to argue with someone smarter than him. Someone else plans to die heroically later this afternoon, assuming the gods stay on schedule. Fate hasn't erased planning. It has simply stripped it of hope. The result is a strange, drained efficiency. People do what they must because not doing it would feel worse. This is one of those mainstream historical realities that slips into your awareness without ceremony. Ancient Greek culture was deeply ritualized. Daily life, washing, eating, training, praying, was structured around repetition. Fate fit neatly into this mindset. If the universe already runs on schedules and cycles, then destiny is just another appointment. Unavoidable, inconvenient, and oddly familiar. You sit near the fire again as someone pours watered-down wine into chipped cups. It's barely morning, but time works differently when your lifespan has a known endpoint. Someone mutters that drinking early won't change anything and no one argues. This is not recklessness, it's resignation with manners. The heroes talk, but never about the ending. That's the unspoken rule. You don't discuss the thing everyone knows. It hangs in the air like humidity, acknowledged only when it becomes unbearable. Instead, they talk about logistics. Who sharpens weapons? Who watches the horses? Who hasn't returned from scouting? Fate might be inevitable, but someone still has to organize the day. You notice how prophecy has changed language itself. Words like if and maybe appear less often. When does all the heavy lifting now? When Troy falls. When Achilles dies. When Odysseus finally limps home smelling like seawater and regret. Grammar bends under destiny's weight. A quirky fringe belief drifts through your thoughts. Some ancient sources hint that certain Greeks believed speaking too directly about fate could hasten it, like tempting the universe with confidence. This explains the careful phrasing, the euphemisms, the vague gestures toward the future. It's not superstition so much as cosmic customer service. Don't provoke the system. You walk past a shrine where offerings sit untouched. Olive branches. Small cakes. A poorly carved figurine that looks suspiciously like a god having a bad day. Prayer here is not bargaining. No one asks for survival. They ask for dignity, for clarity, occasionally for a quick death instead of a complicated one. The gods, famously, do not always listen. Historians still argue whether Greek prophecy was meant to emphasize fatalism or moral responsibility. Watching this scene unfold, you sense the answer is both. Fate sets the destination. Character determines how unbearable the journey becomes. The heroes understand this, and it exhausts them. Every action feels like a performance graded by eternity. You sit beside a young hero, not famous, not destined for epics, and watch him lace his sandals for the third time. His hands shake slightly, not from fear of death, but from the weight of knowing his death will matter very little. This is another quiet cruelty of fate. Not everyone gets a dramatic ending. Some threads are cut without applause. He tells a joke about hoping the oracle was wrong about his hairline, and you recognize this as the third joke of the night. It lands softly, like a pillow tossed across the room. Humor here is a survival instinct. If you can laugh at destiny, even briefly, it loses a fraction of its authority. The day progresses in small tasks. Training drills. Repairs. Waiting. You realize how much waiting defines heroic life. Waiting for signs. waiting for gods to intervene, waiting for the thing you already know will happen. This waiting drains energy more effectively than combat ever could. You begin to feel the same fatigue seep into your own body, not physical tiredness, but that deep mental weariness that comes from carrying knowledge without agency. It's the exhaustion of spoilers applied to existence. Every moment feels pre-owned by the future. Another historical truth slides into place. Greek tragedy was performed at festivals, in daylight, among crowds. These were not private laments, but communal acknowledgments of shared helplessness. Watching heroes suffer under fate allowed ordinary citizens to process their own limited control over harvests, wars, illness, weather. The heroes weren't above fate. They were proof that no one was. As afternoon approaches, you notice how the hero's movements slow, not because the day is ending, but because anticipation peaks. Fate is loudest when nothing happens. Every shadow feels meaningful. Every sound could be the start of the thing. You sit down, finally, and let yourself be still. This world does not reward urgency. Destiny will arrive on time whether you rush or not. You understand now why everyone seems so tired. It's not the battles. It's the waiting, the knowing, the endless rehearsal of an ending you cannot rewrite. And as you breathe in the warm, dusty air, you realize this section of the journey is teaching you something quietly profound. Sometimes the hardest part of fate isn't dying for it. It's waking up every day and living with it. You find yourself drifting, almost involuntarily, toward Achilles, because stories always do that. They orbit him, whether he asks for it or not. He sits alone now, away from the low noise of the camp, staring out toward the flat horizon, as if he's waiting for it to apologize. You stand beside him, and he does not acknowledge you. Not out of rudeness, but because he already knows this moment exists. Prophecy has robbed surprise of its charm. Achilles wakes every day with the same calculation running quietly in the background of his mind. Short life, long fame, or long life, no one remembers. This is the choice history loves to romanticize, but standing here with him, you can feel how false that romance is. It's not a choice between glory and obscurity. It's a choice between meaning and breathing. And neither option feels generous. You notice his movements are economical, almost bored. He sharpens his blade not because he needs to, but because routine is grounding. When you know you're ending, you cling to process. This is something no epic poem really dwells on. Heroes killing time, not enemies. Achilles flexes his fingers, tests the edge of his spear, then sighs, not dramatically, just tiredly. The kind of sigh you hear from someone who has already read the instructions and hates them. One mainstream historical fact presses itself into your awareness as you watch him. In Homeric tradition, Achilles is fully aware of his fate. His mother Thetis tells him outright, "There's no mystery, no oracle riddles to misinterpret. He knows exactly what's coming." And yet, knowing does not make it easier. If anything, it sharpens the dread. Certainty doesn't numb pain, it gives it structure. You sit on a nearby stone and feel the weight of Achilles, awareness seep into you. Every choice he makes is haunted by its endpoint. Train harder, it won't save him. Hold back, it won't extend him. Even kindness feels strategic, filtered through the question of legacy. Will this be remembered? Does it matter if it isn't? A strange, almost absurd detail surfaces in your mind. a fringe tidbit whispered through later interpretations. Some ancient commentators believed Achilles' near invulnerability made him emotionally fragile, hypersensitive to insult and boredom, because physical danger rarely distracted him. When death isn't an immediate threat, anticipation becomes the enemy. Waiting becomes unbearable. Achilles glances at you now, finally. His eyes are sharp, restless, and deeply unimpressed by the universe. He doesn't ask why you're here. People rarely do in myths. He asks instead, do you ever get tired of knowing? The question lands heavily because you do. You absolutely do. He talks, not loudly, not poetically. He talks like someone venting after a long day. He complains about the gods, lack of creativity, about how destiny could at least vary the details, about how people assume he enjoys being famous, as if admiration is a substitute for rest. This is not the Achilles of statues and textbooks. This is a young man who cannot imagine growing old, and is furious that everyone else can. Historians still argue whether Achilles represents idealized heroism or a critique of it. Sitting here, listening to him speak, you sense the answer leans toward critique. He is powerful, yes, but power has not freed him. It has trapped him inside expectations so narrow they feel suffocating. He cannot choose cowardice. He cannot choose anonymity. His identity is a cage lined with applause. You watch as Patroclus approaches quietly, careful not to interrupt too much. Their bond hums softly, understated but profound. Love here is not dramatic. It's practical. Patroclus brings water. Achilles accepts it. This simple act carries enormous weight. When your future is fixed, comfort becomes sacred. The Greeks understood this deeply, even if they didn't always articulate it. There's an unspoken understanding between them. Patroclus knows Achilles will die. Achilles knows Patroclus might too. Neither says it. Speaking fate aloud feels like accelerating it, like tapping the glass of reality too hard. Instead, they share silence. Silence is safer. You notice something else. Achilles laughs, briefly, at a comment Patroclus makes about the camp food. It's a small laugh, surprised, like it escaped without permission. This is one of those quiet jokes destiny didn't account for. A reminder that even inside a locked narrative, moments slip through the cracks. As the day drags on, Achilles trains. You watch him move, fluid, precise, devastating. This is where fatigue takes on another layer. Achilles is tired, not because his body is weak, but because his excellence feels wasted. He is too good for a life this short, too vivid for a story that ends halfway through its potential. Another historical note drifts in gently. Greek audiences knew Achilles would die long before the Trojan War ended. Watching him fight was an exercise in tragic anticipation. Victory scenes weren't celebrations. They were countdowns. Each triumph brought him closer to the end everyone already mourned. You feel that countdown now. Every clash of bronze feels heavier than it should. Achilles knows it too. He fights with restraint that looks like arrogance from a distance. In reality, it's preservation, not of life, but of sanity. He cannot sprint toward the end too quickly, or the waiting will become unbearable. A subtle humor creeps in when Achilles mutters that if fate insists on killing him, it could at least wait until he's done being annoyed. The universe, as usual, does not respond. That's joke number 3, and it lands softly, like a tired smile. As evening approaches, Achilles sits again, staring at the horizon. You realize he watches the future the way others watch weather. Inevitable, impersonal, occasionally cruel. He doesn't ask for escape, he asks for meaning. And meaning, inconveniently, is something fate refuses to guarantee. Historians still debate whether Achilles' rage is the true subject of the Iliad, or whether it's the cost of honor. Sitting beside him now, you sense the deeper truth. His rage is exhaustion turned outward. It's what happens when you're not allowed to imagine alternatives. As the light fades, Achilles finally lies down, armor beside him like a silent witness. Sleep does not come easily. Knowing your fate makes rest feel irresponsible, as if closing your eyes might cause you to miss the moment everything begins. You lie nearby, sharing the stillness. And in this quiet, you understand something essential about tired heroes. They are not worn down by battle alone. They are worn down by foresight. By living every day in the shadow of a future they cannot alter, only approach. Achilles closes his eyes eventually. Tomorrow, he will wake knowing exactly how this ends. And still, he will rise. Not because fate demands it, but because meaning, however brief, still feels worth the effort. You leave Achilles behind, not because his gravity weakens, but because it is overwhelming. Stories cling to him like static, and you need air. You find it near the shoreline, where Odysseus is already awake, already annoyed, already planning 3 conversations ahead. If Achilles is tired because his fate is short and bright, Odysseus is tired because his fate is long, winding, and deeply inconvenient. He is crouched near the water, poking at something with a stick. Driftwood, maybe a dead fish, maybe a metaphor. You stand beside him, and he glances up with the practiced look of a man who has learned not to be surprised by unexpected company. Odysseus does not ask who you are. He asks what you want. This, too, is destiny-shaped behavior. When the universe keeps throwing things at you, you stop asking why and start asking logistics. Odysseus already knows how his story goes. He knows Troy will fall. He knows he will survive. He also knows that survival is not the same as relief. 10 years of war, followed by 10 years of wandering, monsters, storms, humiliation, and customer service disputes with gods who refuse to read their own terms and conditions. Immortality is offered at one point, famously, and he declines. Not because it's noble, but because eternity sounds exhausting. A mainstream historical fact settles into your thoughts. In Homeric tradition, Odysseus is unique among heroes for being praised not for strength, but for metis, cunning intelligence. He survives because he adapts. Yet that same adaptability ensures his suffering stretches on. The universe seems to reward him with longevity and punish him with detail. You watch him work through plans out loud, arguing with himself in half-muttered sentences. If he sails this way, Poseidon gets angry. If he sails that way, everyone dies faster. If he stays put, something worse happens later. Fate hasn't removed choice. It has multiplied it into an endless maze where all paths lead to exhaustion. A fringe tidbit flickers through your awareness. Some ancient storytellers believed Odysseus' greatest curse was not divine wrath, but memory. Unlike other heroes who blaze and vanish, Odysseus remembers everything. Every mistake, every face, every delay. Forgetting would be mercy. Instead, he catalogs trauma like a meticulous accountant. Historians still argue whether Odysseus represents human resilience or moral compromise. Standing here, you see a third option, burnout. He is clever, yes, but also profoundly tired of being clever. Every trick buys time, not peace. Every solution creates another problem downstream. He tells you casually that prophecy is worse than ignorance. At least ignorance lets you hope accidentally. Knowing you'll get home someday means Every day you're not home feels like theft. He jokes dryly that if the gods wanted him to appreciate Ithaca more, they could have just sent a postcard. That's joke one, and it lands with a soft snort from himself, which seems to surprise him. You walk with him along the shore. He talks about Penelope, not romantically, but practically. She is the fixed point, the anchor, the reason the journey continues even when it becomes absurd. Love here is not passion, it is orientation. Without it, Odysseus would simply lie down somewhere and let the sea finish the paperwork. You notice how Odysseus treats fate differently from Achilles. Achilles resents it. Odysseus negotiates with it. Even though he knows the negotiation is fake, he bargains with the universe the way tired people bargain with insomnia. Just let me rest a little longer. I'll deal with everything later. Fate, predictably, does not respond. Another historical truth drifts in gently. The Odyssey was as much about endurance as adventure. Ancient audiences recognized this. Monsters were obstacles, not the point. The real test was persistence without certainty of comfort. Odysseus survives not because he's favored, but because he keeps moving even when movement feels pointless. You watch him pause, staring out at the horizon. His shoulders sag, not from fear, but from accumulation. Every mile adds weight. Every clever escape adds another story he will have to carry home with him. You realize something unsettling. Odysseus, intelligence, his greatest gift, is also what makes him suffer longest. Awareness stretches pain. A quiet, almost ridiculous moment breaks the heaviness when Odysseus complains about ship maintenance. He mutters that no prophecy ever mentions splinters, leaks, or the emotional toll of rowing with the same men for years. That's joke two, and it earns a brief smile. You sense how fate has shaped his personality into something restless, suspicious, always calculating. When the future is fixed but the path isn't, paranoia becomes professionalism. Trust becomes risk management. Even kindness must be evaluated for consequences. Historians still debate whether Odysseus' lies are justified by survival or corrosive to his soul. Watching him now, you suspect the answer is both. Every lie keeps him alive. Every lie costs him a little rest. There is no clean ledger here. As the sun climbs, Odysseus prepares to leave, because waiting feels dangerous. He always leaves before staying becomes attachment. You walk with him to the edge of the camp. He tells you one last thing, almost gently. The worst part isn't that fate decides the ending, it's that it makes the middle so long. That's joke three, though it barely qualifies as one. It lands like a truth disguised as humor. You watch him go, already calculating his next move, his next delay, his next compromise. You feel his exhaustion linger in the air like salt. As you turn back toward the camp, you understand that tired heroes come in different forms. Some burn out quickly, like Achilles. Others wear down slowly, like Odysseus. But all of them share this quiet burden, knowing the destination and having to walk every step anyway. You do not find Hector resting. Rest is a luxury for men who expect to survive. Hector stands instead on the walls of Troy, watching the plain where the dust never quite settles. The war hums below like an unresolved argument. Somewhere in that haze are Achilles, Odysseus, and all the other names that will outlive him. Hector knows this. He has always known this. His exhaustion does not come from surprise, but from responsibility. You approach quietly, because Hector is the kind of man who hears judgment even in footsteps. He does not turn right away. His armor is scuffed, practical, repaired too many times to look heroic. There is no mythic shine here, only maintenance. He finally looks at you, and his expression is polite in the way leaders learn to be when they have no time. Hector is tired in a distinctly domestic way. He is not driven by glory or cleverness, but by obligation. He fights because someone has to stand between Troy and annihilation, and apparently that someone is him. Fate has assigned him the role of shield. Shields do not get songs, they get dents. A mainstream historical fact settles into place. In the Iliad, Hector is portrayed as the noblest Trojan hero, a defender rather than an aggressor, deeply bound to family and city. Ancient audiences would have recognized him as tragic not because he was flawed, but because he was decent in a system that rewards spectacle. You stand beside him and look out at the battlefield. Hector talks about logistics, supply lines, morale, the difficulty of keeping young men brave when bravery mostly results in dying. He does not dramatize it. He sounds like a tired manager, explaining why the night shift keeps quitting. A fringe tidbit slips in softly. Some later interpretations suggest Hector's tragedy resonated so strongly because he represents the losing side with dignity. Unlike Achilles, whose rage consumes everything, Hector's restraint makes his fate feel crueler. He does everything right and still loses. That idea tends to keep people awake at night. Historians still argue whether Hector's decision to face Achilles outside the walls was heroic or reckless. Standing here, you suspect it was neither. It was inevitable. When you are the last functional barrier between destruction and the people you love, choices narrow until they barely exist. Hector rubs his neck, where the armor pinches. He jokes, lightly, that no prophecy ever mentions chafing. That's joke one, and it lands with a dry exhale. Humor here is not entertainment, it is pressure release. He speaks of Andromache and their son, without poetry. Love, for Hector, is not an escape fantasy. It is the weight that makes him stay. He knows exactly what his death will mean for them. That knowledge does not change his actions. It just makes every step heavier. You realize something unsettling. Hector is exhausted because he cannot opt out. Achilles can sulk. Odysseus can wander. Hector must show up every day, even when the math is hopeless. Fate has decided the outcome, but routine still demands performance. Another historical reality drifts through. Troy, as depicted in the Iliad, is already doomed long before the famous horse. The audience knew this. Hector likely did too, in story. The tension was never about whether Troy would fall, but how long dignity could be maintained before collapse. Hector watches the gates behind him, then the field ahead. He is the hinge. Everything swings on him, briefly. He tells you that the worst part of being brave is the people rely on it. That's joke two, though it is delivered flat, like a memo. There is no bitterness in him, just fatigue. He does not rage against fate. He budgets around it. He plans as if survival were possible, even when it clearly isn't, because planning keeps panic away. You see now that exhaustion can look like calm, when panic has already been processed and discarded. Historians still debate whether Hector's humanity was emphasized to contrast Greek heroics or to critique war itself. Watching him adjust his helmet, you suspect the answer is simpler. Someone wanted to remind listeners that the people who lose wars are usually the most responsible ones. A moment passes where Hector leans on the wall, eyes closed. For a heartbeat, he allows himself to imagine not fighting today. The image flickers and vanishes. He straightens. Duty reasserts itself. Fatigue is not allowed to interfere with obligation. He thanks you for standing with him, though you did nothing. That's joke 3, unintentionally, gratitude misplaced out of habit. Leaders thank even the air when the load is too heavy. When you leave him, Hector is still watching the plane, still holding a city together with posture and presence. You understand now that some heroes are tired not because they know they will die, but because they know others are counting on them right up until that moment. As you walk away, the walls of Troy loom behind you, already half memory. Hector remains, doing his job, even as fate sharpens its tools. You drift forward from Troy's walls into a quieter exhaustion, the kind that smells like salt and damp wood. The battlefield noise fades, replaced by the soft slap of waves against a ship's hull. This is where Odysseus lives most comfortably, between destinations, between promises, between versions of himself. If Hector is tired from standing still, Odysseus is tired from never truly stopping. You find him sitting near the stern, carving at a piece of driftwood with a knife that has seen better centuries. He looks up, as if he expected you. Odysseus always does. His eyes carry the alert fatigue of someone who has slept in armor for too long, even when no one asked him to. Unlike Achilles or Hector, his weariness is not loud, it hums. Constant. Background noise. Odysseus is exhausted by contingency. Every plan needs a backup. Every backup needs a lie. Every lie needs remembering. People forget how tiring cleverness is. Brains burn calories too, and Odysseus has been running a marathon since Troy. A mainstream historical fact settles in gently. In Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus is defined by metis, cunning intelligence, rather than brute strength, making him a cultural ideal of strategic survival rather than heroic sacrifice. Ancient audiences admired this, but admiration does not equal rest. He tells you, casually, that thinking ahead never ends. Even now, on a calm sea, his mind is mapping currents, imagining storms, anticipating betrayal. He jokes, joke 1, that peace feels suspicious, like a trap set by the gods with extra pillows. You almost laugh, but the truth underneath it is heavy. He cannot relax, because fate punishes the inattentive. A quirky tidbit floats up. Some ancient commentators believed Odysseus's real punishment was not the monsters or the years away from home, but the constant necessity of pretending to be someone else. King, beggar, liar, hero, each role erodes a little more sleep. Historians still argue whether Odysseus's suffering was a moral test imposed by the gods or a narrative consequence of his own arrogance. Sitting here, you sense a third option: exhaustion as interest payment. Cleverness gets you far, but it charges compound fatigue. Odysseus stares out at the horizon and admits something quietly. He misses being ordinary, not powerful, not famous, just predictable. No prophecies, no disguises. Just mornings that look like yesterday. That kind of life, he suspects, belongs to people who were never noticed by fate in the first place. You notice his hands shake slightly, not with fear, but with held-back motion. He is a man designed for action, forced into waiting. Waiting drains him more than Cyclopes ever did. Monsters at least provide clarity. Waiting leaves room for imagination, and imagination is where anxiety breeds. Another historical layer slides in. The Odyssey reflects a post-war Greek anxiety about reintegration, what happens to warriors after the fighting ends. Odysseus embodies this problem. He survives everything, yet cannot arrive anywhere fully intact. He laughs softly at himself. Joke 2, saying that destiny could have picked someone less thoughtful. A man who never thinks sleeps better, he mutters. You cannot disagree. Odysseus speaks of Penelope, but not romantically. He speaks tactically. She is clever. She survives by delay, by weaving and unweaving time itself. They are matched in exhaustion, bound by patience rather than passion. Love, here, is endurance. Historians still debate whether Odysseus's journey is meant to glorify perseverance or warn against hubris. Watching him rub his temples, you suspect it is a warning disguised as an adventure. Surviving everything does not mean escaping cost. The sea darkens. Odysseus finally lies back, knife still in hand, eyes half closed but alert. He will not fully sleep. He never does. Fate has trained him too well. As you step away, the ship creaks softly, like an old joint. Odysseus remains caught between motion and rest. A hero worn thin by foresight. You realize that some fates do not crush you outright. They keep you awake forever. You move on without ceremony, because heroes rarely get clean transitions. The sea smell thins, replaced by dust and sun-baked stone. Your feet ache before you notice why. This land is heavy. Every step feels like the ground remembers something violent and wants you to remember it too. Somewhere nearby, a man is breathing like the world itself weighs on his chest. You find Heracles sitting alone at the edge of a clearing, shoulders slumped, club resting beside him like an abandoned chore. This is not the triumphant statue version. This is the in-between Heracles, the one no sculptor bothers to carve. His muscles are still there, of course, but they look tired, as if strength itself has grown bored of proving a point. Heracles is exhausted in a different way, not from thinking, like Odysseus, but from doing. Too much doing, too much fixing, too many impossible errands handed down by gods who never lift a finger themselves. A mainstream historical fact settles in. The 12 labors of Heracles were formalized in later myth traditions as acts of purification after he was driven mad and killed his own family. Ancient audiences knew this. They did not need reminders. Strength, in Greek myth, is often compensation for unbearable guilt. He does not look at you at first, he just exhales, slowly. The sound is almost a growl, but softened by resignation. He jokes, joke one, that if one more god asks him to clean something symbolic, he might finally say no. You imagine that would end poorly. Heracles is tired of being useful. Every problem eventually becomes his problem. Monster? Call Heracles. River clogged with filth? Heracles. Cosmic imbalance caused by divine negligence? Heracles again. No one asks if he wants to be involved. Strength is treated like consent. A quirky tidbit slips in. Some fringe interpretations suggest the labors were originally localized folk tales later stitched together, which would explain why they feel like unrelated chores rather than a coherent quest. Heracles, even in mythic structure, is overworked. He rubs his hands together, still stained with old blood that never quite washes off. This is a PG-13 world, so the gore stays implied, but the weight remains. Every monster left a mark, even if the skin healed. Fatigue accumulates invisibly. Historians still argue whether Heracles represents moral redemption through suffering, or a warning about unchecked violence being sanctified after the fact. Sitting with him, you lean toward the warning. Redemption that requires endless labor never really forgives. It just postpones judgment. He finally looks at you. His eyes are smaller than you expect. Not dim, just tired. He admits, quietly, that he cannot remember the last thing he did for himself. Joke 2 lands softly. Apparently, heroism does not come with paid leave. Heracles talks about fate like it is a manager who keeps adding tasks 5 minutes before closing time. You sense that his exhaustion is not just physical, it is existential. If he stops, who is he? A man without tasks scares him more than any lion. Another historical layer drifts in. Heracles was worshipped as both a hero and a god in different regions, blurring the line between mortal suffering and divine reward. Even apotheosis, it seems, is just another job promotion with unclear benefits. He stands, stretches, and winces. Power creaks when overused. He picks up his club again. Not eagerly, but dutifully. Joke 3. At least monsters don't talk, he mutters, which tells you exactly how done he is with gods. As you step away, the clearing feels heavier. Heracles resumes walking toward his next labor, shoulders bowed not by fear but by inevitability. You realize some heroes are not crushed by fate. They are worn down, one obligation at a time, until strength itself feels like a sentence. You do not travel far before the air sharpens. As if the world itself has drawn a blade, salt returns, but not the calm domestic kind. This is salt whipped into spray by wind and shouted orders, salt ground into open skin. You are walking along the edge of a camp that never truly sleeps, even when everyone inside it desperately wants to. Achilles is awake. Of course he is. He is always awake, or pretending to be. The armor is off, stacked carelessly nearby, like something he resents needing. Without it, he looks younger than the story suggests. Dangerous, yes, but also profoundly bored by danger. His heel presses into the sand as he stares out toward the water, where ships creak softly, exhausted in sympathy. You stand beside him, and for a moment neither of you speaks. The Trojan War hums in the background like a machine left running too long. This is the part no epic poem lingers on. The waiting, the repetition, the sense that glory has terrible pacing. A mainstream historical fact slides into place. Achilles, rage, as framed in Homer's Iliad, is the emotional engine of the poem, beginning with his withdrawal from battle and ending, eventually, with his reluctant return. Ancient audiences understood this as a meditation on honor culture, not just a tantrum with weapons. Achilles does not look angry now. He looks tired of being angry. Rage, it turns out, is heavy when carried for weeks on end. He scratches at the sand absently, carving lines that mean nothing and everything. He tells you, without turning, that everyone keeps reminding him he is the best, the fastest, the strongest. Joke 1 drifts out dryly. Apparently this means everyone also expects him to solve the war before lunch. You sense that being exceptional is just another form of labor. He knows how this ends. That is the problem. Achilles is cursed not with ignorance, but with clarity. A short life, full of glory, or a long, quiet one that no one sings about. The choice is famous. Living inside it is less glamorous. A quirky tidbit surfaces. In some lesser-known versions, Achilles disguises himself as a girl on Skyros to avoid the war entirely, only to be exposed by Odysseus using weapons as bait. Even the greatest warrior once tried hiding behind a dress. Fate, apparently, is not fooled by wardrobe changes. Achilles laughs at something you did not say. He admits he sometimes wonders what would happen if he simply stayed in the tent forever. Let Agamemnon shout himself hoarse. Let destiny knock politely, and then leave. Joke 2 lands. He suspects the poets would still find a way to blame him. Historians still argue whether Achilles' withdrawal is meant to critique heroic pride or expose the emotional cost of a system that reduces human worth to battlefield performance. Standing here, listening to the waves, it feels less like philosophy and more like burnout. He flexes his hands. They tremble, not from fear, but from restraint. Achilles is not afraid of dying. He is tired of being used as a narrative device by everyone around him. Every plea, every insult, every prophecy circles back to the same point. Be what we need you to be. Another historical layer settles in. Bronze Age warfare, as later reconstructed, involved long periods of inactivity, punctuated by brief, brutal clashes. The Iliad compresses time, but Achilles lives it stretched thin. Days of nothing, moments of everything. He tells you about Patroclus without saying the name at first. Just, the one who understands when I'm quiet. The air tightens. This is not sorrow yet, this is anticipation. Fate's most sadistic feature, letting you love something you know you will lose. Joke 3 slips out, barely audible. Achilles says if the gods wanted better outcomes, they should have hired better planners. He does not laugh at his own joke. You do, softly, because it feels rude not to. As dawn creeps in, the camp stirs. Armor clinks. Voices rise. Achilles stands, already bracing himself. The mask slides back into place. Hero mode engaged. You realize that exhaustion does not always come from fighting. Sometimes it comes from knowing that no matter what you choose, the ending is already written, and you are just walking toward it at human speed. You step away as he reaches for his armor again. The sand smooths over your footprints almost immediately. The sea keeps breathing. Achilles does what he has always done, moves forward, not because he wants to, but because the story refuses to continue without him. You drift onward without ceremony, because ceremonies are for beginnings and endings, and you are stuck in the long, exhausting middle. The camp noise fades, replaced by something quieter but no less heavy. The weight of reputation. You feel it before you see anyone. Fame, it turns out, has a smell. Old sweat, bronze polish, and expectations that refuse to die. This is where glory naps lightly, never fully asleep. You move through stories already told too many times. Men glance at you as if you might be someone important, and that alone is tiring. You begin to understand how heroes feel when every step is observed by future generations who have the luxury of skipping the boring parts. A mainstream historical fact settles in gently. In ancient Greek society, Kleos, glory earned through heroic deeds, was considered a form of immortality, passed down through oral poetry long before it was written. To be remembered was to live forever, at least in theory. In practice, it meant never being allowed to rest while alive. You sit near a low fire where no one is arguing, which feels like a miracle. Nearby, a hero you recognize but cannot immediately name sharpens a blade that does not need sharpening. This, you realize, is a coping mechanism. When fate gives you no control over the ending, you polish the middle. Sleep-deprived glory is not glamorous. It yawns. It rubs its eyes. It stares into flames and forgets what year it is. Joke 1 arrives quietly. If epic poets were honest, half of their verses would just be heroes asking if anyone has seen their helmet. The hero finally speaks, and you realize it is Ajax. Huge, broad, built like a wall someone forgot to decorate. He does not complain. Complaining would imply hope for change. Instead, he states facts. Tomorrow, there will be fighting. After that, maybe more fighting. Somewhere in there, death will find whoever it was scheduled for. You notice how often heroes talk about death as if it has an itinerary, not a threat, an appointment. This casual acceptance is not bravery so much as emotional exhaustion. A quirky tidbit drifts in. Some ancient vase paintings depict heroes sitting, leaning on shields, looking distinctly unimpressed rather than triumphant. These images rarely make it into modern retellings, but they suggest artists noticed the fatigue too. You feel it now, settling into your bones. Glory, when stretched over years, becomes indistinguishable from obligation. The songs promise eternal remembrance, but they do not mention the insomnia. Historians still argue whether Homeric heroism was aspirational or cautionary, whether audiences were meant to admire these figures or quietly thank the gods they were not them. Sitting here, you suspect the answer is both, depending on how well you slept the night before. The fire crackles. Someone laughs too loudly at a joke that was not funny. Joke 2 slides in as you realize humor is rationed like food in wartime. Small portions, carefully spaced. Your thoughts wander to Achilles again, because everything does eventually. His fame is a weight no one else can lift, but everyone else feels crushed by smaller versions of the same thing. You remember how he stared at the sea, not longing for victory, but for silence. A messenger passes through, breathless, announcing nothing urgent. The tension spikes anyway. This is what constant anticipation does. It trains your nerves to panic even when nothing happens. Fate does not need to act. It just needs to wait. You stand and walk through the camp's edge, where heroes become ordinary men again. Someone is repairing a sandal with string that absolutely will not last. Someone else is arguing with a friend about whether the gods can hear complaints whispered into helmets. Joke 3. The consensus seems to be, yes, but they enjoy them. Another historical truth emerges. Ancient warfare involved long sieges, disease, boredom, and attrition. Elements largely glossed over in heroic poetry. The real enemy was often time itself. You feel that enemy now. Time stretches, thins, repeats. Days blur. Nights refuse to fully arrive. Sleep becomes shallow, like water you cannot quite sink into. As you lie back, staring at stars that have seen all of this before, you realize something unsettling. Glory is not what exhausts heroes. Knowing they will be remembered for moments that cost them everything, that is what drains them dry. Somewhere nearby, someone begins to sing softly. Not a heroic anthem, just a tune to remind themselves they are still human. You let it wash over you, slow and imperfect. Fate remains unchanged. The war remains unsolved. But in this fragile pause, you understand why heroes keep going. Not for songs, not for statues, but because stopping would mean sitting alone with the knowledge of how it all ends. You breathe. The fire dims. Glory keeps watch, eyes half closed, waiting for morning like everyone else. The sun rises again, not ceremoniously, but with the same quiet persistence that has defined this entire stretch of events. You step forward, feeling the heat creep into muscles still aching from yesterday's exertions and the day before that and the day before that. It is relentless, like fate itself. Somewhere beneath the sun's glare you hear the faint hum of a river, as though the earth is sighing along with all the tired heroes around you. You come across Diomedes, already awake, already moving. He is polishing his armor with methodical care, the clang of metal against cloth, a rhythm you begin to feel in your chest. He does not glance up at you at first. Diomedes. Fatigue is subtle. It is discipline worn thin, endurance stretched over countless decisions that weigh more than any enemy could. He is cautious because he has learned that in war, vigilance never sleeps. A mainstream historical fact. Diomedes, in Homer's Iliad, is one of the few Greek heroes praised for both martial skill and piety, often noted for respecting gods and omens while demonstrating exceptional courage on the battlefield. Yet courage comes with a cost. Every correct decision leaves a shadow of second-guessing, and every victory carries new obligations. He looks at you finally, eyes narrowed in that faintly impatient way someone develops when everyone else seems incapable of sustaining their own pace. Diomedes jokes, joke one dry and weary, that armor polishing is just as important as spear thrusting, though historians conveniently forget to record it. You smile quietly. The humor has the sharp edge of truth. A quirky tidbit surfaces. In some later traditions, Diomedes was thought to possess divine favor, allowing him to wound gods themselves, but ancient commentators also suggest he suffered recurring nightmares afterward, perhaps an early acknowledgement of the psychological cost of violent prowess. Heroes may be immortal in story, but their minds apparently are fragile. Historians still debate whether Diomedes represents Greek martial virtue or the burdens of obedience. Watching him methodically check each strap, each dent in his armor, you realize the answer might be both. Virtue exacts its own tax, and obedience is measured in sleepless nights. He talks to himself quietly, mapping battle strategies in whispers, counting contingencies. You notice how his thoughts loop. Each plan leads to another. Each precaution breeds the need for a further one. Fate is patient, but Diomedes cannot afford to be. Even minor mistakes ripple into catastrophes beyond his control. He pauses to sharpen a spear, and the motion is careful but habitual. This is what habit becomes after years of being relied upon. An armor of ritual to guard against both chaos and exhaustion. He mutters, joke too, that if he had a coin for every mistake avoided, he could have retired long ago. He is not bitter, just tired. Another historical layer. During the Greek Dark Ages, when oral tradition preserved these tales, heroes like Diomedes were role models not for their immortality, but for reliability under pressure. They exemplified endurance, foresight, and decision-making, all exhausting in the extreme. Diomedes finally stands, the sun catching off the polished surfaces of his armor. You notice how the light gleams, not with majesty, but with the weight of constant attention. Even reflection feels like labor here. He glances toward the horizon, where the dust of the battlefield rises faintly. Every day is a reminder that battles are not just fought with swords, but with patience, vigilance, and the acceptance that outcomes are never entirely your own. He jokes, joke 3, whispered, that if Destiny had a customer service line, he'd have called in sick decades ago. As you leave him to his routines, you notice the rhythm of the camp. Small, mechanical, unremarkable movements creating a fragile harmony. Heroes are not only weary because of combat, they are fatigued by expectation, by the demand that they continue performing in perpetuity. Even in the quiet moments you feel it. The weight of predestined outcomes, the burden of repeated choices, and the relentless ticking of time measured against human endurance. Every hero, in their own way, has learned that survival is as much about managing fatigue as it is about fighting. The river hums. The wind shifts. Diomedes marches onward. And you, carrying the echoes of exhaustion from Achilles, Hector, Heracles, and Odysseus, feel the tide of this relentless world pressing lightly against your shoulders. You follow the path out of the sun-drenched camp toward a landscape that feels both familiar and unkind. Dust swirls at your feet, as if it remembers the footsteps of all who have passed before you, a quiet record of lives spent under the weight of expectation. Somewhere in the distance, a temple's ruins cling to a ridge like a tired sentinel, offering shade that is more psychological than physical. Here, you find Agamemnon, seated on a low stone wall, face buried in hands that have issued orders for decades. He does not look at you immediately. His fatigue is visible in the slump of his shoulders, and the way his fingers tremble slightly while he rubs his temples. Leadership, you realize, ages differently than the body. The mind accumulates tension long after the body adapts. A mainstream historical fact. Agamemnon, as king of Mycenae and leader of the Greek forces in the Iliad, bore ultimate responsibility for coordinating the Greek army's actions during the Trojan War. His decisions shaped the outcomes of battles, alliances, and the fates of thousands, yet ancient texts often emphasize that this power came with personal cost, including the loss of honor and family strife. He finally lifts his head, eyes weary but sharp. Agamemnon jokes. Joke 1. Laced with self-deprecation. That command is mostly memorizing complaints, then deciding which ones will matter later. The humor is thin, like the light of a dying fire, but it lands. You sense that leadership fatigue is subtler than battle fatigue, but just as profound. A quirky tidbit drifts through. Some later mythographers suggest Agamemnon's legendary arrogance may have been an exaggeration, designed to frame his failings in a moral narrative rather than reflect historical reality. It is easy to imagine a man tired of being blamed for the chaos of war, feeling as if his reputation is a separate, judgmental entity. Historians still argue whether Agamemnon's authority functioned as a moral force for Greek unity or as a narrative device to dramatize the consequences of hubris. Sitting here beside him, you suspect both interpretations carry a grain of truth, illuminated by the exhaustion etched in his posture. Agamemnon speaks quietly of councils, disputes, and logistics. Even in this lull, his mind runs calculations. Food rations, battle strategies, alliances. Every decision adds invisible weight. He shifts his position slightly, wincing at the subtle ache in his lower back, a reminder that the cost of command is not abstract. It is concrete in every worn joint. Joke 2 emerges when he mentions the Greek heralds, who seem to delight in delivering complaints in triplicate. His dry humor is a shield, a mechanism honed to protect against the psychological wear of constant responsibility. Even leaders, you realize, need tools to survive monotony. Another historical reality. Siege warfare during the Bronze Age involved long periods of stasis, punctuated by sudden bursts of combat, which required commanders to maintain readiness without burning out. Agamemnon embodies the human toll of that strategy. Vigilance without release. You notice how often he returns to the personal dimension of command. He mentions his brother Menelaus with a brief, weary sigh, as if kinship is both comfort and burden. Leadership does not isolate him. It compounds the fatigue of others into his own experience, so every relationship carries the tension of multiplied responsibility. Historians still debate whether Agamemnon's eventual fate in the myths, murdered upon return, serves as poetic justice or commentary on the fragility of human authority. Observing him now, you feel that the exhaustion of leadership alone is a form of subtle punishment, long before narrative closure arrives. He stands slowly, adjusting the folds of his tunic. Every movement reminds you that his body, like his mind, is worn by the constant effort of maintaining authority. Fate has written his story, but living it day by day is a matter of endurance, not glory. Joke 3 surfaces, almost inaudible. He mutters about wanting a vacation, but not the kind that requires explaining decisions to hundreds of veterans and allies. It is the humor of impossibility, a shared secret between you and him. As you leave Agamemnon, the ridge behind you seems heavier, weighted by his presence. Leadership is not measured in applause or song. It is measured in the quiet, persistent erosion of sleep, patience, and energy. You sense that while others wield weapons or brains, he wields time itself, and it cuts slowly. The sun climbs higher, and the path ahead carries on, endless and uncompromising. Agamemnon returns to his calculations, to the unrelenting pulse of command, while you walk onward, feeling the cumulative weight of every hero you have encountered. Their fatigue is now yours in reflection, an echo of duty, courage, and inexorable fate. You continue your slow journey through the shadows of myth and history, where every hill and hollow seems to remember footsteps that never left marks on the soil, only in stories. The heat of the day softens, but the weight of anticipation never does. This is where you encounter Patroclus, not in the grandeur of battle, but in the quiet aftermath, leaning against a tree, his armor set aside. He is not at rest, though he looks the part. Quiet endurance, you realize, is its own kind of exhaustion. Patroclus, fatigue is the kind that comes from being tethered to another's fate. Achilles, shadow stretches long, even here. Every movement, every decision, every choice he makes is measured against the risk to the friend he cannot abandon. There is no glory in it, only duty, and that duty is relentless. You sit near him, listening to the wind stir leaves and dust alike, and feel the weight of loyalty pressing into your ribs. A mainstream historical fact. In Homer's Iliad, Patroclus, death is a turning point, igniting Achilles, rage and leading to major shifts in the course of the war. Ancient audiences recognized this as a narrative pivot, but the lived experience of being tethered to another's fate, its anxiety, its exhaustion, was often glossed over in favor of drama. Patroclus smiles faintly. Joke 1, remarking that if he had a drachma, for every time he wished he could disappear into obscurity, he could have bought his own armor and stayed home. Humor here is sparse but necessary, a brief lifeline in a world of unending demands. A quirky tidbit emerges. Some scholars speculate that Patroclus' role was initially symbolic of the emotional labor warriors carried for each other, a humanized echo of abstract concepts like honor and obligation. He is not only a companion, but a mirror of how fatigue compounds when responsibility extends beyond oneself. Historians still debate whether Patroclus' closeness to Achilles is intended primarily as emotional depth or as narrative device. Watching him stretch his legs and rub at a stiff neck, you realize it is both. Intimacy and narrative reinforce each other, layering human weariness over epic consequence. He recounts his past days quietly, moving supplies, rallying troops, calming the frightened. Each act is essential, yet unseen. This is the invisible labor of heroes, the small, repetitive, tedious work that sustains the visible, dramatic actions others notice. Joke 2 drifts out. A dry whisper. Apparently, being the moral anchor of a legendary hero does not come with health benefits or vacation days. He laughs softly, more to keep the tension in check than for amusement. Another historical note. Bronze Age warriors often relied on smaller, trusted companions to maintain lines of communication and logistics, roles historically underappreciated in heroic poetry. Patroclus embodies this quiet service, an unsung hero within the epic itself. You notice how he watches the horizon, not for enemies, not for omens, but for the return of the one he supports, always ready to act, always braced for consequence. Fatigue here is both physical and moral. the result of being indispensable without acknowledgement. Joke 3 surfaces. He remarks that sometimes he imagines Achilles as a cloud, beautiful, powerful, untouchable, and impossible to rest under. You almost laugh aloud, realizing that metaphor carries a weight far heavier than any spear. Patroclus rises, preparing for the day's obligations. His movement is quiet, careful, deliberate. Even when he walks toward action, the shadow of responsibility drapes over him. You follow at a respectful distance, feeling the rhythm of his endurance imprint itself in your chest. Every hero you have met so far carries fatigue differently. From Odysseus, mental strain, to Heracles, physical burden, Achilles, rage, Diomedes, vigilance, Agamemnon's leadership, and now Patroclus, tethered loyalty. Each form is unique, but all converge on one truth. Heroism is an endless cycle of exhaustion, invisible to those who only read the final chapters. As the wind shifts and the leaves rustle softly, you sense that the slow, unrelenting pull of fate moves equally through every figure in this landscape, shaping days, actions, and nights alike. Patroclus walks on, steady and aware, and you cannot help but follow, carrying the echo of every fatigue you have witnessed so far. You leave the shadowed trees behind, the soft rustle of leaves fading into a horizon that smells of sun-baked earth and distant salt. The air is warmer here, heavier with the tension of stories still unfolding. Somewhere ahead, you catch the faint glimmer of armor, shining not in glory, but in habit. It is Odysseus, restless as always, pacing along the edge of a quiet hill. His eyes scan endlessly, not just the terrain, but the invisible threads of consequence that bind him to a world determined to challenge his wit. Odysseus' fatigue is subtle, yet persistent. Not the heavy, visible exhaustion of Heracles or Achilles, but a mental strain, a constant calculation that leaves small grooves of worry etched into his face. He is not only fighting enemies, but also the expectations that come from his own reputation. Cleverness must be proven, mistakes magnified, and cunning continuously reinvented. The mind, after all, can tire as much as any muscle. A mainstream historical fact. In Homeric tradition, Odysseus is celebrated as the cunning strategist whose intelligence saves and sustains the Greek forces at Troy, from devising the Trojan horse to navigating complex battlefield scenarios. Ancient audiences recognized his ingenuity, yet the psychological cost of constant problem-solving is rarely highlighted in epic recitation. Odysseus glances at you briefly, and a small, sardonic smile tugs at the corners of his lips. Joke 1. Apparently being known as the clever one, comes with permanent insomnia and unsolicited advice from gods who think you're not thinking fast enough. You realize his humor is both armor and release. A quirky tidbit appears. Some minor myths suggest that Odysseus had a habit of recording daily events in small, portable scrolls, perhaps an early form of journaling, to manage the stress of constant scheming. Whether true or apocryphal, it hints at the human need to find control in uncontrollable circumstances. Historians still argue whether Odysseus' cleverness is a narrative celebration of human ingenuity or a cautionary tale about over-reliance on intellect. Sitting beside him now, you sense both: brilliance that protects, but brilliance that isolates, leaving him alone with his calculations. He recounts minor frustrations: messengers late, miscommunications between units, unpredictable weather affecting tactical decisions. Each issue is minor, yet the cumulative weight of continual problem-solving bends the spine, steals sleep, and tightens the chest. His weariness is not from combat, but from the endless expectation to think and plan without reprieve. Joke 2 drifts in quietly. He remarks that gods probably invented riddles just to ensure he never relaxed. The humor is dry, layered with the bitterness of someone perpetually overworked by divine interference. Another historical observation: the Greek heroic ethos valued mental acuity alongside physical prowess. Odysseus exemplifies this, demonstrating that heroism is not monolithic. Mental labor can be just as taxing as physical, and in some cases, more insidious. You watch him pause, examining a distant ridge, tracing an invisible line from problem to solution, strategy to consequence. Every decision carries weight, every action demands foresight. Fatigue settles in differently here, quiet but pervasive, gnawing at the edges of concentration. Joke 3 surfaces. He mutters about writing a guidebook titled "How to Be Clever and Constantly Exhausted," noting that he might get to it after his next decade-long journey. You chuckle, realizing that humor, again, is the only reprieve from relentless expectation. As Odysseus moves on, pacing steadily and lost in thought, you understand that his exhaustion is layered: mental vigilance, responsibility to others, and the constant push against fate's predetermined edges. It is a weariness that cannot be healed with rest, only endured. The landscape stretches ahead, and you follow the subtle rhythm of his pace. Each step carries echoes of previous heroes: the heavy strength of Heracles, the tethered loyalty of Patroclus, the restless rage of Achilles. Odysseus' brand of fatigue adds complexity to the mosaic you are tracing. Heroism is not a singular burden, but a network of strains that intersect in unexpected ways. You walk on, carrying their exhaustion in your shoulders, your mind registering the multiplicity of fatigue, the subtle, patient persistence of those tasked with extraordinary expectations. And somewhere in the distance, the land itself seems to whisper reminders that the slow thread of fate continues, unbroken and relentless. The sun dips slightly, casting long shadows that stretch across hills and tents, reminding you that even light bends to the relentless passage of time. You pause near a shallow stream, letting your reflection ripple along with the water. You see the fatigue of heroes mirrored there: deep-set eyes, tense shoulders, and the quiet surrender to routines that never promise relief. Around you, the camp murmurs, a low hum of preparation, gossip, and whispered prayers. The day feels like it has been stretched into weeks, and yet, somehow, it is only morning. You find Hector leaning against a tree at the far edge, spear in hand, gaze distant. He is clean-shaven, youth fully present, but with the weight of expectation carved into his brow. Unlike Achilles, whose exhaustion is fiery and blatant, Hector carries a quiet, simmering fatigue, the knowledge that his city, his people, and his honor all rest on decisions he cannot postpone or ignore. Each choice is magnified because failure is not abstract. It is immediate, tangible, and tragic. A mainstream historical fact: Hector, Prince of Troy, is revered as the city's primary defender in Homer's Iliad, embodying a blend of courage, familial responsibility, and civic duty. Ancient audiences recognized Hector as the epitome of duty-bound heroism, often contrasted with the more self-focused glory of Greek champions. Hector notices you silently and gestures toward the stream. Joke 1 slips out, quiet but sardonic. Apparently, Troy's survival plan includes a daily ritual of silently wishing that the gods would go on holiday. You smile softly. Humor is scarce here, but it pierces fatigue like sunlight through clouds. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some lesser-known epics suggest Hector spent early mornings practicing diplomacy with elders and messengers, demonstrating that heroism is not only measured by sword or spear, but also by patience and skill in negotiation. The small labors are as draining as any combat. Historians still argue whether Hector represents idealized civic responsibility or a tragic figure crushed by narrative necessity. Standing beside him, you feel both the weight of leadership and the inevitability of heroic mortality. He talks briefly about Andromache, voice soft, almost hidden in the rush of wind. Love, he admits, is another layer of responsibility. Joke 2 emerges. Apparently keeping a city safe is hard enough, but doing so while making sure your family doesn't resent you is Olympic-level multitasking. His humor is faint but genuine. Another historical note. Homeric warfare was protracted, with long periods of stasis interrupted by intense battles, requiring commanders to manage troops over weeks of tedium and anxiety. Hector's vigilance embodies that extended tension, the constant readiness that consumes mind and body alike. You notice how he examines the horizon, calculating, predicting, anticipating. Fatigue settles not only in muscles, but in the very marrow of awareness. He cannot stop. The city's heartbeat echoes in his chest. Every misstep risks not just personal harm, but cascading consequences across Troy. Joke 3, whispered as he adjusts his armor, drifts into the air. He muses that perhaps the gods enjoy watching him juggle everything, just to pass the time. Humor again becomes a shield, a fragile, necessary tool against relentless expectation. As you move along, leaving Hector to his meditative vigilance, you feel the cumulative fatigue of all the figures you have met: Achilles, Patroclus, Diomedes, Agamemnon, Odysseus. Each carries exhaustion differently, but all are united in the subtle, patient attrition of responsibility, fame, and preordained destiny. The stream trickles on, the shadows lengthen, and you walk forward, aware that every hero, in their own way, carries the same invisible burden. It is a thread connecting them all, a slow, unyielding, inescapable rhythm that fate has set and time enforces. You move past the stream, boots kicking up fine dust, and notice the subtle signs of weariness that blanket the landscape like a quiet fog. Everything is fatigued. The trees that have endured countless seasons, the soil that bears the weight of history, even the air, which feels heavy with the collective breaths of heroes. Here, the war is not just a series of battles. It is a continuum of small, grinding tasks, obligations, and rituals that sap both body and spirit. You trudge onward, aware that fatigue has its own gravity, and it pulls on everyone in ways that glory rarely acknowledges. At the edge of a ridge, you see Ajax, shield leaning against a tree, staring into the distance as though the horizon itself might provide answers he has long stopped expecting. His broad shoulders slump just enough to betray a relentless physical and mental exhaustion. Unlike the mental strain of Odysseus or the civic weight of Hector, Ajax's fatigue is rooted in endurance, the endless repetition of drills, guard duty, and the knowledge that every action carries the potential for failure, no matter how perfectly executed. A mainstream historical fact: Ajax the Greater, known for his immense size and strength, was a primary defender of the Greek camp during the Trojan War, celebrated for holding the line during critical moments and exhibiting extraordinary courage. Ancient traditions highlight his physical prowess, but less often the psychological endurance required to maintain vigilance over prolonged campaigns. He glances at you briefly, offering joke 1. Apparently, holding the line is easy, as long as everyone else knows their job, and unfortunately, they often do not. Humor is sparse, dry, and edged with truth, a small relief against relentless vigilance. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some later myths suggest that Ajax once attempted to block the sun with his shield, metaphorically illustrating the enormity of his duties. It may not have happened, of course, but the imagery emphasizes the seemingly impossible weight heroes carried, both literally and figuratively. Historians still argue whether Ajax embodies brute strength, stoic endurance, or tragic inevitability. Observing him now, you see all three. His body and mind are engines of persistence, churning tirelessly against the tide of expectation and fate. He adjusts his grip on the shield and mutters, joke too, that if he had a drachma for every time someone assumed strength equals invincibility, he could retire comfortably. You chuckle quietly, recognizing the humor as a coping mechanism honed over years of ceaseless exertion. Another historical layer. Prolonged campaigns in the late Bronze Age required physical endurance for days without proper rest, alongside acute awareness of enemy movements. Ajax embodies this dual strain, where body and mind are inseparable in their exhaustion. You notice him pacing briefly, checking distances, scanning for threats, even when none are immediate. Fatigue here is not absent. It is integrated, the backdrop against which every action occurs. His vigilance is routine, almost meditative, yet the quiet pressure never lifts. Joke 3 drifts softly. He whispers about wishing the gods would assign someone else to carry the heavy guy around for a day. Humor, again, acts as a fragile shield, a brief reprieve from the weight of responsibility. As you walk beside Ajax, you sense the pattern emerging among all the heroes you have observed. Exhaustion manifests in physical strain, mental vigilance, moral responsibility, or emotional tethering, yet it is unified in its quiet, persistent presence. Each figure embodies a facet of human weariness magnified by the demands of heroism. The ridge slopes downward, and you follow the path, boots crunching against stone and soil, each step reminding you of the slow, inevitable progression of time. The heroes continue their routines, seemingly endless, their fatigue mirrored in the land itself, the wind, and the quiet hum of anticipation. The sun dips lower, painting the world in amber and shadow. You feel the cumulative weight of these observations pressing lightly into your own shoulders, a reminder that the slow, enduring toil of heroes is not merely a story, but a human truth repeated across centuries and stories alike. The shadows lengthen, and the air cools slightly as you traverse a narrow pass overlooking the plains below. The wind carries the faint scent of dust, sweat, and distant smoke from campfires that heroes have lit and extinguished countless times. You notice a rhythm in the landscape itself, a cadence of endurance, persistence, and silent vigilance that mirrors the fatigue etched into every figure you have passed. Here you encounter Nestor, not the youngest nor the strongest, but unmistakably the embodiment of experience honed by centuries. Nestor leans against a boulder, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of his face. He is fatigued differently than the warriors in their prime. His exhaustion is layered, woven from decades of observation, counsel, and responsibility. Each word he has spoken over years carries weight. Each decision, now long past, leaves a trace that shapes both memory and expectation. His body is still capable, but his mind has accumulated the quiet burden of wisdom, a subtle, patient strain that is harder to detect than bruised muscles or sleepless eyes. A mainstream historical fact. Nestor, king of Pylos, is noted in Homer's Iliad as a seasoned counselor and veteran of previous wars, revered for both his experience and his ability to advise younger warriors. Ancient audiences respected the wisdom of age, acknowledging that mental labor and foresight could be as exhausting as physical combat. He glances at you briefly, joke 1 emerging with the dry humor of someone who has seen too many mistakes repeated. Apparently, giving advice is easy until everyone ignores it anyway. You smile, sensing that this humor is a defense against accumulated frustration and quiet fatigue. A quirky tidbit appears. Some obscure myths suggest Nestor maintained detailed records of past campaigns, essentially creating early proto-strategic archives to guide younger generals. Whether historically accurate or not, it illustrates the persistent mental load he carried, attending to both memory and foresight. Historians still argue whether Nestor is primarily a moral exemplar or a narrative device to frame the experiences of younger heroes. Observing him now, you feel both the burden of guiding others and the exhaustion inherent in endless vigilance. He speaks quietly about past campaigns, recounting lessons learned, strategies that succeeded or failed, and minor misjudgments that became cautionary tales. Even in narration, fatigue is apparent. The stories are repeated, refined, and weighted with the responsibility of teaching others without causing despair. Joke 2 drifts in softly. He mentions that some lessons are learned too late, while others are never appreciated, and that both circumstances are equally exhausting. Humor, again, functions as a tool to process the subtle but persistent strain of wisdom. Another historical observation. Leaders in Bronze Age warfare had to balance direct participation in battle with oversight, diplomacy, and instruction. Nestor exemplifies this hybrid, where mental labor, mentorship, and responsibility intersect to create continuous, low-grade exhaustion. You watch him shift slightly, stretching stiff joints, checking the placement of supplies, and reviewing the behavior of younger warriors. Every act, no matter how small, carries echoes of consequence. The burden is not fleeting, it is cumulative, like sediment layered over centuries. Joke 3 surfaces as he mutters about keeping a dozen young heroes in line while avoiding their wrath, a task that could challenge even the gods. Humor, you realize, is the tether that keeps him grounded in humanity amidst the inexorable tide of experience and duty. As you leave Nestor to his routines, the landscape stretches onward, a tapestry of fatigue woven across each hero. The physical, mental, and moral strains of heroism converge here in subtle, unrelenting patterns. Each hero embodies a different shade of exhaustion, yet they share a thread: the slow, inevitable erosion of energy, patience, and certainty under the weight of expectation. The path slopes toward twilight, and you walk on, carrying the echoes of decades, battles, and endless vigilance. Nestor's presence, a quiet monument to endurance, reinforces the lesson that heroism is measured as much in persistence as in strength or cunning. Twilight deepens, and the first stars prick the sky with cold, distant light. You feel the day's warmth fading, replaced by the soft chill of night, carrying the scent of earth and faint smoke from distant fires. The path narrows, winding through rocky terrain where shadows pool and twist. It is here that you encounter Diomedes, the warrior whose fatigue is sharpened not by age or intellect but by the relentless interplay of courage and consequence. His armor is polished but heavy, reflecting the fading light with a muted gleam, and every movement bears the weight of countless skirmishes. Diomedes leans on his spear, eyes scanning the horizon, yet not for enemies alone. He calculates, anticipates, and mentally reviews the decisions that could tip a battle in favor of allies or doom them. His exhaustion is constant, the type born from perpetual vigilance, where every success is tempered by awareness of what might have gone wrong. Unlike Odysseus, whose mind races with possibilities, or Hector, whose sense of civic responsibility pulls at him, Diomedes, fatigue is fused with the immediacy of action and consequence, the need to perform perfectly in each decisive moment. A mainstream historical fact, Diomedes, king of Argos, is famed in Homeric epics for his bravery and skill in battle, particularly during the Trojan War, where he undertook daring exploits alongside other Greek heroes. Ancient sources emphasize his combination of martial ability and tactical acumen, highlighting the demands placed on warriors of his caliber. He glances at you, joke one escaping with dry amusement. Apparently being the hero of heroes does not come with insurance or a day off. You laugh quietly, aware that humor, again, acts as a shield against the grinding strain of constant readiness. A quirky tidbit emerges. Some minor sources suggest Diomedes carried small charms or tokens into battle, intended to ward off both harm and doubt. Whether effective or symbolic, these talismans hint at the mental burden warriors carried, seeking psychological fortitude alongside physical protection. Historians still debate whether Diomedes' exploits are primarily narrative devices to highlight heroism or accurate reflections of Bronze Age martial practices. Watching him now, you sense that both interpretations contain truth. Extraordinary skill and the unseen weight of decision-making coexist in every measured step he takes. He speaks softly of minor victories, recounting episodes where split-second decisions preserved lives or nearly cost them. Each memory is tinged with the fatigue of survival, of anticipating danger, of carrying the lives of others in his hands. The narrative of heroism often emphasizes spectacle, but here, the quiet, cumulative strain of continual vigilance is apparent. Joke 2 drifts through his words. He comments that sometimes he wishes someone would invent a board game version of war so he could experience all the glory without the bruises or exhaustion. The humor is faint but a reprieve, allowing both him and you to acknowledge the impossible expectations placed on mortal shoulders. Another historical reality. The intensity of Bronze Age warfare required not just strength, but constant alertness, rapid decision-making, and adaptation to unpredictable circumstances. Diomedes embodies this lived reality, his fatigue inseparable from his strategic on-the-spot responsibilities. You notice how he shifts, adjusting the weight of his spear and shield, moving with efficiency born from repetition. Each motion, however slight, carries echoes of countless campaigns, the mental calculus of threat assessment, and the constant need to remain vigilant even when battle seems absent. Joke 3 surfaces as he mutters about the difficulty of keeping track of every ally's mistakes while avoiding his own, a task he likens to herding cats with spears. Humor, again, is a thin but necessary shield against relentless psychological strain. As you walk onward, leaving Diomedes to his solitary vigil, you sense the emerging pattern among these heroes. Every form of heroism carries its own fatigue, whether mental, physical, or moral. The spectrum of exhaustion you have witnessed. Achilles, rage; Patroclus, loyalty; Odysseus, intellect; Hector's civic weight; Ajax's endurance; Nestor's wisdom, now finds resonance in Diomedes' relentless vigilance. Night deepens fully, and the path stretches ahead in darkness, carrying the quiet hum of countless stories. You walk forward, the weight of accumulated fatigue pressing lightly into your shoulders, the soft understanding settling that heroism is not a singular strain, but a web of interwoven burdens, each demanding its own endurance. Night settles fully now, wrapping the landscape in a velvet hush, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant clatter of a camp. The stars above twinkle faintly, as though tired themselves, mirroring the steady, persistent exhaustion of the heroes you have walked alongside. Here, in the soft darkness, you encounter Aeneas, not yet the epic hero of later Roman lore, but a figure of quiet persistence, carrying obligations that stretch far beyond personal desire. His fatigue is subtle yet profound, born of duty, leadership, and the recognition that every decision shapes not just his path, but the fates of countless others. Aeneas leans against a stone, gaze fixed on the distant horizon where faint smoke curls upward. Unlike the flash of fury in Achilles, or the relentless mental pacing of Odysseus, Aeneas. Exhaustion is steady, like a candle burning at both ends but refusing to extinguish. He speaks softly, words careful, deliberate, weighted with both hope and the awareness of fragility. You feel the tension in his posture, the kind of fatigue that comes from bearing responsibility quietly, day in and day out, with little recognition. A mainstream historical fact. Aeneas, a Trojan hero, is central to later Roman mythology as the ancestor of Rome's founders, revered for his piety and perseverance. Ancient sources highlight his sense of duty, particularly in caring for family and followers amid chaos, presenting a model of sustained, measured heroism. Joke 1 escapes lightly. Apparently, leading a small army across uncertain terrain is exhausting, and doing so without a fan or Wi-Fi makes it worse. Humor in this context is faint, almost conspiratorial, a private acknowledgement of strain. A quirky tidbit. Some myths claim Aeneas carried his father Anchises on his back during the fall of Troy, literally embodying the weight of familial duty. Whether symbolic or literal, it highlights the physical and emotional toll of responsibility, a burden that adds layers to exhaustion beyond battlefield fatigue. Historians still argue whether Aeneas' portrayal emphasizes moral virtue or narrative convenience, though both interpretations illuminate the quiet endurance inherent in his character. Watching him now, you sense that duty itself is a form of labor, exhausting in its constancy and the unending awareness of consequence. He recounts minor tasks, organizing provisions, reassuring the anxious, charting paths through dangerous terrain. Each act seems mundane compared to epic battles, yet the cumulative effect is fatigue in its purest form, a slow, relentless erosion of energy and spirit. Joke 2 drifts softly. He remarks that sometimes he wonders if the gods designed endurance tests with no actual reward in mind. You sense the faint humor masks a profound truth. Heroism is rarely as glamorous as the stories suggest. Another historical layer. Trojan heroes, much like their Greek counterparts, were expected to maintain both martial readiness and moral guidance, balancing the immediate demands of survival with long-term obligations. Aeneas embodies this dual strain, a quiet testament to layered fatigue. He rises, checking his small contingent of followers, ensuring they are secure and accounted for. Every motion, every glance, carries a weight of responsibility and awareness of potential consequences. Fatigue here is cumulative, less visible, but no less pressing than the physical exhaustion of warriors like Ajax or the mental strain of Odysseus. Joke 3 surfaces as he mutters about keeping people alive without turning into a strict disciplinarian, an impossible task rendered slightly lighter by a wry grin. Humor, again, is a tool for endurance, a small reprieve from the relentless gravity of duty. You follow Aeneas as he moves cautiously along the ridge, the night deepening around you. Across the terrain, the cumulative strains of all the heroes you have witnessed converge: physical exertion, emotional tethering, mental vigilance, moral responsibility. Each form of fatigue interacts, weaving an invisible tapestry of human and heroic limitation, reminding you that no act of courage or skill comes without cost. The night seems to pulse in rhythm with these burdens, a quiet, pervasive echo that follows each hero. You trudge onward, carrying the awareness that heroism is not merely an act of bravery or cleverness, but the patient, unrelenting endurance of endless obligation. The night grows deeper, a vast, quiet expanse, that blankets both earth and sky. Stars shimmer faintly, scattered like distant sparks, and the air carries a chill mixed with the scent of pine, damp soil, and the faint tang of smoke from distant fires. You move along a narrow trail that winds between rocky outcrops, each step echoing softly, a reminder that in this quiet, fatigue becomes almost tangible. It clings to the heroes you pass, and now it touches you as well. Here, you encounter Achilles once more, but not in the heat of rage or battle. Instead, he sits alone on a ridge, shield beside him, helmet resting against a stone. His gaze is distant, unfocused, yet every movement betrays the weight of mind and body, a lingering exhaustion that persists long after the adrenaline of combat fades. It is the fatigue of a hero whose glory comes at a price, the constant tension between expectation, mortality, and desire for personal peace. A mainstream historical fact, Achilles, central to the Iliad, is celebrated as the greatest Greek warrior, unmatched in skill and strength. Yet Homer also portrays him as emotionally and psychologically complex, with moments of introspection and vulnerability that suggest heroism is entwined with personal cost. He notices your approach and offers a wry, tired smile. Joke 1 slips from his lips. Apparently, being the hero everyone writes about includes unlimited commentary on every minor decision, no tips, and no days off. You laugh softly, realizing that humor is a common shield among these figures, a way to soften the relentless weight of expectation. A quirky tidbit. Some minor traditions suggest Achilles would secretly write notes to himself about strategy, emotions, and observations of comrades, an early attempt at personal reflection, perhaps to manage the mental strain of constant leadership and combat. Whether historical or symbolic, it underscores the unseen layers of fatigue that accompany fame and responsibility. Historians still argue whether Achilles' emotional struggles are dramatized literary devices or reflections of genuine heroic psychology. Observing him now, you recognize both immense skill, immense responsibility, and the quiet, persistent toll each exerts on mind and body. He speaks softly of minor regrets, moments of hesitation, and the ongoing weight of reputation. Each memory carries the invisible burden of expectation, the knowledge that every choice is amplified and scrutinized. The intensity of his fatigue is compounded by the unrelenting attention he receives, both mortal and divine. Joke 2 drifts in subtly. He mutters that if someone invented a vacation specifically for heroes, he might finally get a week of peace. But the gods probably wouldn't allow it. Humor, again, is fragile yet vital, a thin veil shielding weariness from despair. Another historical observation. Homeric heroes were subject to prolonged campaigns, public scrutiny, and the constant presence of gods influencing events. This environment magnifies both physical and psychological exhaustion, showing that heroism is rarely without hidden costs. You sit nearby, absorbing the weight of his stillness, noting how even a moment of rest is layered with vigilance, self-reflection, and the quiet pressure of destiny. Every breath, every shift, carries the accumulated fatigue of experience and expectation. Joke 3 surfaces in his quiet smirk. He remarks that perhaps someday he'll write a guidebook called How to Be the Greatest and Never Get a Break, though he doubts anyone would survive the instructions. Humor, again, is a lifeline, a tiny thread of relief in the overwhelming fabric of fatigue. As you rise, walking alongside Achilles toward the next ridge, you feel the shared pulse of exhaustion that binds all these heroes: physical strain, emotional tethering, moral responsibility, mental vigilance. Each burden is unique, yet together they form a persistent, unrelenting rhythm that echoes across the landscape, tracing the slow, inevitable passage of human and heroic endurance. The night stretches on, quiet and profound, as the echoes of countless struggles reverberate through the hills. You trudge onward, mindful that the tapestry of fatigue is as much a part of heroism as courage, cunning, or strength. Dawn is a fragile glow on the horizon, soft and tentative, brushing the edges of mountains with pale gold. The night's weight lingers in the air, thick and silent, yet now it blends with the anticipation of a new day. You move slowly along the ridge, boots pressing into cold soil, hearing faint whispers of wind that carry the distant echoes of camps already stirring. Each hero you have observed, Achilles, Hector, Ajax, Odysseus, Diomedes, Nestor, Aeneas, has left traces of their fatigue on this path. The land itself seems to carry their stories, the invisible weight of their burdens settling into the soil, the rocks, and the air. You approach the central camp where the remnants of the Greek and Trojan forces are quietly preparing for the day's trials. It is a scene of muted activity. Soldiers polishing armor, stretching taut muscles, murmuring prayers, and exchanging soft banter. The heroes move among their followers, every gesture deliberate, measured, as if aware that every act carries consequences beyond immediate perception. Fatigue permeates everything, not just the physical toll of previous skirmishes, but the mental weight of responsibility, expectation, and impending choices. A mainstream historical fact. Greek and Trojan forces in the late Bronze Age were engaged in campaigns that could last months or even years, requiring both sustained physical endurance and mental resilience. Epic narratives like the Iliad emphasize that heroism often includes periods of waiting, planning, and the management of exhaustion as much as combat. Joke 1 surfaces from the quiet, almost conspiratorial atmosphere. Apparently, planning a day of war is exhausting, and having to look heroic while doing it adds insult to injury. The humor is light, whispered among those who know the truth of the fatigue, offering a brief reprieve from relentless expectation. A quirky tidbit. Some minor legends suggest that certain heroes carried small personal charms or objects, tokens of luck, memory, or comfort during these prolonged campaigns. While practical efficacy is debated, these artifacts reflect the psychological strategies employed to endure both uncertainty and physical strain. Historians still argue whether the portrayal of hero fatigue in epics is primarily a literary tool to emphasize drama or a reflection of historical reality. Observing the camp now, you recognize that both elements are present. Enduring physical and mental strain is real, yet myth amplifies it into a narrative that conveys the depth of human and heroic endurance. You notice Achilles walking beside Odysseus, exchanging quiet words of strategy, tempered with sarcasm. Joke 2 drifts from their conversation. Apparently, even the greatest heroes sometimes need to double-check that no one is about to trip over their own ego. Humor softens the persistent tension, a reminder that even amid fatigue, camaraderie persists. The early morning air hums with faint energy as warriors stretch, check weapons, and prepare for the day. Every motion, however slight, carries echoes of the endless exertions of the past. Training, skirmishes, and vigilance. The fatigue is cumulative, layering itself invisibly over muscles, minds, and hearts. Joke 3 surfaces from Nestor, who watches the young warrior stumble through morning routines. He mutters about the difficulty of teaching persistence to those who think heroism is a single dramatic act rather than a long, slow endurance. Humor is, once more, a tether, anchoring mind and body amidst the heavy tide of responsibility. As you continue along the camp's perimeter, the full weight of what you have observed settles. Heroism is not instantaneous glory, but the accumulation of fatigue, choice, and consequence. Physical strain, emotional tethering, mental vigilance, moral responsibility, all converge in a quiet, continuous rhythm that shapes not only the heroes themselves, but the outcomes they influence. You pause for a moment, taking in the panorama, the golden light of dawn, the distant hills, the silent recognition of burdens shared and carried. The path stretches forward, endless and inevitable, a testament to the slow, patient rhythm of human endurance, heroic and ordinary alike. The wind whispers through the camp, carrying faint echoes of laughter, sighs, and whispered prayers. You sense, deeply, that heroism is inseparable from fatigue, that every victory and failure is tempered by the persistent weight of obligation. The stories you have followed converge here, in this quiet moment, revealing the profound reality behind the myth. The slow, steady, inescapable labor of being human, heroic, and finite. As the morning light continues to spread across the hills, you step back, allowing yourself to reflect on the journey you have shared with these heroes. You have walked alongside warriors, counselors, and champions, witnessing not only their moments of triumph, but the quiet, uncelebrated fatigue that defines them. Their stories are not simply of battle and glory, but of persistent exertion, emotional endurance, and the constant balancing of duty and desire. Every choice, every act carries weight. Every breath is an investment in a fragile future. The heroes. Exhaustion is a mirror of the human condition. The slow accumulation of responsibility, the weariness of vigilance, and the subtle erosion of energy that accompanies duty. Even figures enshrined in legend and myth are subject to these rhythms, and in observing them, you come to recognize your own patterns of endurance reflected back. There is no shame in fatigue. It is the quiet companion of persistence, the steady current that shapes heroism and life alike. Humor, camaraderie, and small rituals persist as lifelines, fragile but essential tools to manage the relentless weight of existence. The laughter shared in whispers, the light-hearted observations, and the tiny gestures of care and reflection are threads woven through the fabric of endurance, softening the edges of relentless strain. As you let your eyes rest on the distant horizon, you feel a gentle ease settle over your mind and body. The stories of these heroes, once distant and mythic, now resonate as deeply human. Their struggles, fatigue, and perseverance are echoes of your own. In this quiet, you find a sense of continuity, understanding, and perhaps a small comfort. Now the camp hums with the steady rhythm of life moving forward, and you too are ready to rest. The slow, patient thread of human endurance continues, and you carry the quiet knowledge that being human is itself an act of persistent heroism. Sweet dreams.